Hello and welcome back to The Wargamer and another episode of Straightforward Tanks, the video series in which I show you how to easily paint your bolt action vehicles without needing to use an airbrush or specialist paint. And in this video I'll be showing you how to paint a Marder 3 using the Army Painter range of paints to do so. Before we can begin painting our miniature, we first of all need to prime it, and this is so that the later layers of paint will adhere to the miniature properly. Now we can save ourselves an awful lot of time at this stage by using a coloured spray primer. Now I've used the Army Painter's Desert Yellow Primer for this, as it will give us a really nice Dunkelgelb or dark yellow basis for our camo scheme. The first task after priming our tank is to dry brush it with Drake Tooth. Now this will bring out the detail very quickly and very easily indeed. Now to dry brush, take a preferably flat brush, dip it into some paint, remove most of the excess onto a spare piece of paper or tissue, and then lightly drag the brush over the surface of the tank. This action will steadily build the lighter paint on the raised surfaces and edges of the vehicle, which is very quickly an easy way to bring out these details. You may notice that as I'm dry brushing the surface of this tank, I'm using a vertical up and down motion. Now this is so we can simulate the effect of rain streaks and grime that's dripping down the surface of the hull. This is entirely optional, you don't need to do it yourself, and feel free to dry brush it any way you feel. After dry brushing the surface of the tank, we now want to create the red oxide primer that will act as a tiger striping on this vehicle. In reality, the Dunkelgelb was actually applied over the red oxide primer base, so we're kind of doing it backwards in this sense, but the effect will be the same. The paint that I'm using for the step is Chaotic Red. Now you may notice that I'm also applying it using a sponge instead of a regular brush. Now this is so we can get a nice and feathered appearance on the surface of the tank. The sponge itself was formerly a makeup sponge, hence the pink colouring, as these are pretty cheap to acquire. I've ripped off a top corner just to give the sponge a less uniform appearance, and I'm lightly dabbing the Chaotic Red across the surface of the vehicle. With our camouflage pattern completed, I'll now be base coating the tracks and any other rusted metal areas on the vehicle. Now for this, I'll be using dark stone. Now, as with all the base coats in this tutorial, I'll be creating a mixture of 1 part paint to 1 part water, applying this over the areas we want to paint with the dark stone, allowing it to dry thoroughly, and then applying a second thin down coat over the top. There are 2 main reasons for doing this. The first of all, it improves the flow of the paint and makes it much easier to cover these large areas. It also helps to avoid the potential of obscuring details by applying the paint too thickly. In this next step, I'll now be base coating the rubber rims of the road wheels and also any metal areas on the tank using Necromancer Cloak. After allowing the base coat of Necromancer Cloak to dry thoroughly, the next step is to paint the wooden stowage items using Fur Brown. If, like me, you have some shells in the rear of your Marder, you can paint the warheads of these areas using Crypt Wraith. And then, following that, you can then paint any shell casings using Weapon Bronze. After this step, I would recommend thoroughly cleaning out your brush and changing your water, as you don't want to cross-contaminate any metallic particles into your non-metallic paints that we'll be using in the next few steps. With all of our base coats completed, we can now start working on our weathering. Now before doing this, if you want to apply any decals to your tank, this is the time to do it, as applying the weathering over the top of these decals will make them look a lot more realistic. The first step in weathering our vehicle is to apply a pin wash of strong turning across the surface of the tank. Now a pin wash differs from a regular wash because we only focuses around panel lines and rivets and other details. We don't want to apply it across the entirety of the surface. By doing this, we help to keep a strong transition between the recesses and the flat panels. Once you've completed your pin wash, you can then apply a regular wash over the stowage items and also the tracks as well. With our wash dried, the next step is to apply some rain streaking to the surface of the tank. Now for this, I'm going to be using some mummy robes mixed with some Army Painter's War Paint Mixing Medium. When creating your mixture, I would recommend using 1 part mummy robes to 2 parts mixing medium, as we do want to heavily dilute the mummy robes for this step. Once you have your mixture, you can then apply some vertical lines starting from the top of each of the sections. This will build up and create the effect that rain and other dirt and dust has accumulated on the surface of the tank and run down its surface when wet. The next step in weathering is to apply some chips and scratches in the paintwork of our vehicle, and for this I'll be using Necromancer Cloak. To apply these chips and streaks, I'm going to be using a very thin brush with just a very small amount of paint on the tip of that brush. When painting these chips, you want to think about the areas of the tank which would experience the most wear and tear. In this case, the crew compartment at the back of the vehicle would have lots of crew activity, and so the paint will become scuffed and chipped away. The final step in painting our Marder is to apply some rust effects to the rear exhaust and also the tracks. Now for this, I'm going to be using some fur brown, which has been heavily diluted with water, roughly 2 parts water to 1 part fur brown. When applied over these areas and dried, it will give the effect that rust has become ingrained into these recesses. And here we have the completed Marder 3. Now whilst this tank won't win any painting awards, it's a really quick and easy way of getting your tanks painted and onto the battlefield quickly. Now whilst I've used a Marder 3 for this tutorial, you could apply the exact same colours and techniques used in this video to any late war German vehicle. In the description below you can find a full list of the equipment and paint used in this video, along with links to both my Facebook page and also my Facebook group, The Wargamers. If you enjoyed this video, please do let me know in the comments below, and also give me your suggestions for future straightforward tanks videos you would like to see me tackle. And finally, I just want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, because you guys make these videos possible. If you're interested in supporting me on Patreon as well, you can find a link in the description below, which will take you directly to my Patreon page, where you can donate to me from as little as $1 a month, which just really helps me in producing these videos. And so all that's left to say is thanks for watching and goodbye.